Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming along to tonight's event, which is Challenging Heat Pump Myths with Susan Murray, MP. So my name is Eric Kostadinov. I'm the Public Affairs Manager at the MCS Foundation. So we're a charity founded to oversee the MCS standard scheme, which certifies the quality of renewable energy across UK homes. So our mission is to decarbonise homes, heat and energy. Heat in homes accounts for around 17% of UK carbon emissions, so it's essential if we want to meet net zero goals. So I'll be guiding us through the next hour until 6 o'clock as we hear from our expert panel on all things heat pumps. So firstly, before we begin, I want to say we'll be recording this event and the footage will be available to attendees after the webinar, should you wish to rewatch or share with others. So I will give a quick run through of who we'll be hearing from this evening. Very shortly, I'll be handing over to Susan Murray, MP, the Liberal Democrat MP for Mid-Dunbartonshire. So Susan's an experienced businesswoman and former councillor wanting to deliver on issues that matter most to her constituents. And it's fantastic to be jointly hosting this event alongside Susan. I will then hand to Bean Beanland. Bean's the Director for Growth and External Affairs at the Heat Pump Federation and has over 16 years experience in the space, including 8 years with a heat pump installation contractor. And since 2016, he's been a founding member of the Heat Pump Federation, has concentrated on, amongst other things, consumer protection and heat pump installer training and standards. I will then pass over to Joanna Crown, Product Marketing Manager at Mitsubishi Electric. Joanna has 20 years of experience in marketing that spanned several sectors of the construction industry, with roles including sustainable manufacturing of timber panels, underfloor heating and renewable energy. I will then hand to Richard Warren, the Director of Public Affairs at KENSA. So at KENSA, Richard is responsible for the organisation's policy development and advocacy, helping to create the right environment for ground source and networked heat pumps in the UK. And last but not least is David Cowdery, Acting Chief Executive at the MCS Foundation. And David has a long-standing track record working for environmental and conservation organisations over the last 25 years, lobbying for political change. So we'll hear 5 minutes each from everyone on the panel that I've just listed there, and that should take us up to about 5:30. And then at 5:30, we'll have just under half an hour for a Q&A. So a heads up on the Q&A, we've been inundated with questions, which I think goes to show just how valuable webinars such as this can be, because people have got lots of information they want answering, which is fantastic. So thanks very much to everyone who has submitted a question. We're going to aim to get through roughly 5 or 6, maybe more. We will see, depending on time. And unfortunately, not every question asked will have time to be answered. If you would like to ask a question and haven't already done so, then please use the Q&A function in the Zoom and refrain from using the chat function, although I'm not actually sure the chat function is on. I don't think it is. I would also advise for anyone doing this not to put any personal identifiers in your question unless you don't mind it being on the recording in the future. And for those of you who don't have your questions answered, there will be information during the webinar and in the post-webinar email on how you can contact us at the MCS Foundation and how you can contact Susan as well if you are a resident in Mid-Dunbartonshire. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over firstly to Susan Murray for her opening remarks. Over to you, Susan.
First of all, thank you very much to everybody that's come along. I'm really pleased with the level of interest, and it just shows how worthwhile it is to make sure that people can get the right information about heat pumps, and I'm delighted so many people want to know. I have heard lots of stories from constituents about problems either with having heat pumps installed and finding that they didn't work satisfactorily in their homes and even taking them out again. So I think it's just really good if we can give you some information about what the absolute facts are about heat pumps and dispel some of the myths. And also, I think what's important as well, I would like you to hear about some of the grants and funding that's available if you are hoping to use a low carbon heating source for your homes. I was working with the MCS Foundation, and they have arranged for a YouGov poll to find out about the knowledge in Scotland about heat pumps. And 66% of Scots are familiar with air source heat pumps, but although they're interested, there is still an awful lot of Scots, nearly 60%, who don't know if they would work when the temperatures are below freezing, and many people think that you can't put heat pumps into flats. So there's, a lot of opportunity this afternoon for the experts to give us some more information, because there are a lot of people who would like to change to heat pumps and are thinking about heat pumps when they are changing their current heating systems. Now, to reassure you, I have learned a lot from the MCS Foundation during this process, and I certainly had a lot of misunderstanding about heat pumps when this started, but they have been around since the middle of the 19th century. So in the 1850s, the heat pump technology in a very basic stage was around. So there is certainly a lot of history supporting this move. So just to let you say that we are this afternoon bringing together some experts to answer the questions, to hopefully give you some information. And for those of you that want to go forward by doing your own research, there is a really extremely valuable website called Get a Heat Pump. And their web address is very simple. It is just Get a Heat Pump. In Scotland, there is a website which is supported through the Scottish Government called Home Energy Scotland. And again, that's homeenergyscotland.org. And you can go to that website to get information about the grants and funding that is available. And I know that others will speak about this as well, but there is, through that website, there may be up to £7,500 in grant funding, plus an interest-free loan to top up of £7,500. If you live in a rural area, that grant is increased to £9,000. And there's also a scheme called Warm Homes, which can give you even more support, and they can basically hold your hand through the process of looking at things that will insulate your home and give you a low carbon heating system. So the aim is to give people warm, cozy homes at the same time as reducing the carbon emissions and helping the government to reach its targets. And that's why there's grant funding. So without further ado, I would hand back to Eric to hand over to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah, that's really great. I mean, I think that polling demonstrates just how far we've got to go, and why webinars like this is so important. And hopefully, I mean, a couple of the things in that polling you touched on with flats and with temperatures below freezing, I'm sure we'll get to in the next 52 minutes. So someone who knows a thing or two about heat pumps is Beanland from the Heat Pump Federation. So I'm going to pass over to Bean.
Thank you very much indeed, and Susan, thank you very much for inviting us to have this conversation with your constituents and others. The Heat Pump Federation actually has a strong ongoing program of community engagement because we recognise that levels of understanding and knowledge are below where they need to be if the UK is to successfully make the energy transition over the next 25 years. And we're currently meeting community groups at the rate of about once a week, and a lot of those are in person, and some are a webinar format like this. They're incredibly rewarding. And apart from us getting some messaging across, what it also allows us to do is to hear what the communities are saying. So we hear what you, the consumers, are saying, and that allows us to go back to government and talk to them in ways that are then informed by the consumers. So it's very, very valuable for us to have these sort of two-way conversations. So, so by way of sort of scene setting, we try to get people to think differently about the energy transition. There is an awful lot in the media about how challenging it's going to be, how difficult it's going to be, how complicated it is, how expensive it is. And all of those things are, I'm not suggesting for a moment that none of them aren't true, but it's really important, I think, to recognize that we've been through these sorts of big transitions before, and we've been able to come out the other side, and we've come out better off for it. One of the things we try to get across to people is why the transition is so important. Eric has already alluded to the scale of emissions, carbon emissions that we currently put out from our home heating systems. But many people are still unaware that their gas or other fossil fuel boilers are significant contributors to the overall emissions of UK PLC. So we try and get that first message across, and then we try and reassure people that actually the transition that we're advocating to electrification is also key, because we can reduce the carbon footprint of our electricity generation mix. Most of you, I'm sure, will be aware that we've now dropped coal completely from our generation mix. And so the carbon intensity, the carbon footprint of the electricity grid is falling, and falling very fast. And this is why electrification using electrically driven heat pumps of various types, and my industry colleagues will talk to you about those in a few minutes, that's why electrification is such a strong contributor to the decarbonisation of the UK. We're also looking to reassure people that actually this is not scary new technology. You have all already got heat pumps. Heat pump technology is ubiquitous and is a staple of modern living. You've all got fridges. You've all probably got separate deep freezers. Many of you might have air conditioning in your cars. You might have air conditioning in your offices. All of these are different types of heat pump. So as Susan said, heat pump technology has been around an awfully long time, and think how different your life would be if every morning you had to get up and walk to the farm to get fresh milk, because you've relied on a heat pump to keep your milk fresh and your peas frozen for decades. The key here, I think, for us is having explained why it's important and that there are solutions out there suitable for every home and building, because we have to do commercial buildings as well. The key is how can we make it affordable and accessible for everybody? And that is one of the challenges. Others will talk about the grants available in Scotland, but that is a really important factor. And I believe we can make these things affordable. And we must remember in all of this that the transition actually does give us an opportunity to do an enormous amount of social good. Improving air quality is an obvious one, but there are other things that we can achieve for society in this transition if, as a whole, we choose to take those opportunities. So I'm going to let my colleagues talk about the technical aspects, but those were just my opening views that we want to try and reassure communities such as yours that actually this can be done, it can be made affordable, the technologies do work, and the outcomes for everybody could be absolutely tremendous. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bean. Really great to have your expertise on the panel. I don't know if you wanted to use this 10 seconds or 20 seconds to plug your fantastic podcast as well, which is now available on all good streaming platforms.
Okay, look, that's very generous. Yes, look, in order to extend the conversation with consumers, we have started we've launched a new podcast recently with Evan Davis, the journalist, BBC journalist from Radio 4. And from Dragon's Den fame. It's not a BBC piece, but it is a genuine conversation where we try and go through exactly the points that I was raising about why it's important, why electrification works, and then we tackle things about period and listed buildings, how to find installers, what happens if I live in a flat. They're only 15-minute episodes, very accessible. I'm sure the links will be in the information paper that Susan will publish afterwards. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Bean. Cheers. I thought people could be interested in that if they want a little bit more. So now I'm going to pass over to Joanna Crown from Mitsubishi Electric, who I believe has a presentation for us. Over to you, Joanna.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me into your homes this evening. So hopefully I'll just get my screens all sorted. Can I maybe just get a nod from the panelists that you can all see my presentation? Excellent, thank you. So yes, hello, I am Joanna Crown, Product Marketing Manager, solely responsible for residential heat pumps. That's my area, and for Mitsubishi Electric, and again, only in the UK. So quite a focused area for me. I'm just going to spend a quick 5 minutes on explaining who we are and what we do. So who are Mitsubishi Electric? your local heat pump manufacturer, actually just down the road from Dunbartonshire in Livingston. We manufacture all of our heat pumps there, and they are manufactured for the UK and also exported into Europe. So we're renowned for our 100-year-old quality. Every single nut, screw, wire is checked to meet our stringent quality standards. So not too far away. It's been touched upon already. I'm sure we're going to explore this question a little bit more. But if you want to know if a heat pump is suitable for your home, the simple answer is absolutely yes, it is. But I think we'll probably come on to that in the Q&A later. I know it's a very, excuse the pun, hot topic. And for those that are on the call that are not familiar with heat pumps, I'm going to do my best in no technical language to explain to you what they are and what they do. Okay, so here we go. This is a Mitsubishi Electric air source heat pump. The outdoor unit is typically located against an exterior wall of your home and only needs electricity and water connections to work. The outside air contains heat energy even when temperatures are super, super cold. I'll come on to that bit a bit later as well. The outside air is drawn into the back of the unit, working an electric fan where the heat energy is absorbed into a heat exchanger. Once absorbed, this heat energy is passed into your home to provide heating and hot water. Okay. So once you have decided that you would like a heat pump, we have two excellent tools available for you to use. Firstly, the Find My EcoDan. You answer some simple questions about your home, as you can see that's running through on the screen, and it will suggest the most suitable heat pump for you. And then it will also link you through to finding your local installer to contact for a survey and a quote. So for next steps. And if you also wanted to see what that heat pump looks like outside of your home, you can download our brand new augmented reality app, follow the instructions, and you will be able to see what that looks like outside your home this evening, if you want to download it this evening. Okay, a couple of common questions we get. Firstly, does it work in the cold? And the definite answer is yes. Our heat pumps will warm your radiators with 75-degree flow temperature whilst it's -15 outside. All of our units actually work right the way down to -25. That photograph is Norway, just to prove that it does work in very, very cold climates. And I think Dunbartonshire temperatures lows for your area is around about -8, so well within our heat pump operating range. You will have no concerns. And the other question we get a lot is, are they noisy? No, not at all. Our units a metre away are just 40 decibels, and that is the sound of a library, so you will not hear them at all. And just to finish off, some examples of our EcoDan heat pumps in Scotland. So and I think the outside photos there are actually in the Hebrides, again, just to prove the point that they work in much colder climates as well. So thank you very much. I look forward to the Q&A, and I will hand back to Eric.
Thanks, Joanna. The questions on working at colder temperatures and also the noise, you are right, are two of the most common ones, and as I say, that came out in the polling as well, which Susan alluded to earlier. So yeah. Just a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much.
No problem.
I'm now going to hand over to Richard Warren from Kenza. So take it away, Richard.
Thank you very much, Eric. Right, I'm just going to share my presentation, so hopefully no technical faults at this point. I get a thumbs up from one of the panelists to say that's all working. Fantastic. So just a very quick introduction to Kenza. So like Mitsubishi, we are a manufacturer of heat pumps. We're based at the opposite end of the country, down in Cornwall, and we make ground source heat pumps, which the fundamentals of what's happening inside are exactly as Joanna just said. You're absorbing heat from something into a heat exchanger, which then puts the heat into your home to produce heating and hot water. The difference with a ground source is instead of absorbing the heat from the air, we are taking the heat from the ground. And obviously, unlike the air, you've got stable temperatures or relatively stable temperatures throughout the year. So even in the middle of winter, below 2 or 3 meters below the ground, depending on where you are in the country, you're absorbing around 10-degree heat. There will be some variation, a bit colder in Scotland, a bit warmer down in Cornwall, but you have that constant heat temperature throughout the year. Effectively, the ground is working as a big heat battery, absorbing the heat from the sun during the summer, and then we can use that during the heating season to provide cost-effective and clean heat for your home during the winter. So Joanna's covered, I guess, what are the kind of really core myths around heat pumps, how they work, do they work in colder temperatures? What I want to just touch on quickly is because what Kenza does and what it specialises in is putting heat pumps into buildings that are not perhaps typical. So I'm not going to read all of these quotes. The top 4 are from MPs last year. This isn't to pick out any individual MP, it's to say, actually, these MPs sit on the Energy and Climate Change Committee, or they certainly did before the last election. And they are, more educated and more informed about energy and climate change issues than your average MP. However, even amongst them, there are myths. So there's a lot of quotes. The first one, in my constituency, I've got 40 back-to-back houses. The doors open onto the street. How would they put a heat pump in there? Well, they couldn't. We very much would say, well, actually, they definitely can put a heat pump in that home. These other quotes from MPs are all around flats. The common myth is that you can't put a heat pump in a flat. There's not the outdoor space. Therefore, you're going to have to look at a different solution. Again, we would very much say, no, there is a solution for those properties. And then a final one from an MP was the problem with ground source is you can't really do it in an urban area. It's too expensive and it doesn't really work. Again, we're putting ground source in urban areas. That's pretty much, certainly the bulk of what we do are very much in urban areas. And then the final, the Guardian, slightly ironically, Guardian heat pump mythbuster. Do they work in flats? Maybe in a ground floor converted flat, but probably not anything else. And what heat pump should I go for? Sadly, none are made in the UK. I think both Kenza and Mitsubishi would disagree with that last comment. So I think probably the easiest thing for me to show how this works is I'll come on to a couple of examples of what we've done. But very briefly, Kenza, and I'm happy to say more and more companies are looking at this option. I came up with a process for how to put heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, into lots of properties all at the same time, going back about a decade. And it works fundamentally the same way that if you put a ground source heat pump in your own garden, you'd have a big borehole in the garden. It would go down somewhere between 100 and 200 meters, and that will be your own borehole. The problem with that is it does cost quite a lot of money up front. And most people don't necessarily want to pay all that money up front. Also, and what we really want to do is put it into smaller properties where you don't have your own garden, you don't have that space. So what the concept of what we call networked heat pumps is instead of having it in your garden, you would have the boreholes in the car park around some flats or in the street, for example, in a row of terrace streets. And those boreholes would go in the ground. They wouldn't be your own boreholes. They would be put in by a company like Kenza. And all of those boreholes would be connected together. And effectively, all those boreholes would be shared amongst all the flats or all the terraced houses. And they would all draw the heat from the ground for you to be able to use with your own ground source heat pump in your airing cupboard or the cupboard under the sink. So to come on to a couple of examples where we've done this, the first one was Sutton Dwellings it's owned and run by Clarion Housing. It's a housing association. It's got properties all over the country. This one's right in the middle of Westminster, right in the middle of Chelsea. And it's interesting for a number of reasons because it really does bust a lot of myths. Firstly, we're putting ground source heat pumps into blocks of flats. So we've done 81 flats, all have got their own ground source heat pump that's providing their heating and their hot water. Secondly, these are some of the oldest social housing in the country. So they were built just before the First World War. So we're busting that other myth that you can't put a heat pump into historical properties. The The second example I want to look at is slightly newer social housing, but this is 270 or just over 270 flats in Thurrock in Essex, which we completed about a year ago. And this is showing that you can have ground source heat pumps up, blocks of flats with 10 stories. And these were really space constrained. A lot of these were even studio flats. So we're being able to demonstrate actually with a combination of a small ground source heat pump, we call it the shoebox. It is a little bit bigger than a shoebox. It's probably about the size of a large microwave. And we're putting these ground source heat pumps in combined with a heat battery that allows you, even in a studio flat on the 10th floor of a block of flats, to have a ground source heat pump. And the really exciting thing about this was we were replacing night storage heaters. So that was cutting energy bills by 50 to 60% for residents. So it's really also showing you can get big cost savings in a lot of properties from putting a heat pump in. There's a quick picture of what it looks like. So it doesn't have to take vast amounts of space up in your flat. And I'll hand back to Eric. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Richard. I love the social housing angle because it's the size again is another really big comment that we get all the time. So to see it on there on the last image, the way it's there is really great to see. So thanks again for that. Last but not least, I'm going to pass over to my colleague David Cowdery at the MCS Foundation. Over to you, David.
Brilliant, thank you very much, and I'll just share my screen. You guys can all see that. I'll just give a little bit of information about the MCS Foundation and who we are and what we're about. Basically, I think, if you're installing any heating technology in your home, you want to know that it's installed by really good engineers and it's really good equipment that's been certified, and it gives you that consumer confidence that it's going to work. Now, we know with gas boilers, you've all seen the gas safe mark. It's a mark of quality for the installation. Well, for the renewable sector, that is MCS. MCS was started by the government during the feed-in tariff when there were a number of issues in the market and they wanted quality, and it became the quality mark and the standards mark for the government. We were novated out of government in 2018. So we're about 7 years old as independent from government, but at the same time, we've been around for nearly 20 years. So it's a standard mark, and it's a requirement of all government schemes, not only in Scotland, but also across the United Kingdom, if you are using a government grant or scheme, to make sure that quality products are being put in. There's a picture of the MCS logo. You may have seen it around, you may not have seen it around, but that's the logo to look out for. The standard scheme that does the quality mark provides the assurance, not only sort of helps certify the installer, but also the equipment that's going into your home. So it's been through a rigorous process and you have that confidence that it's there. And if there's a problem, you can contact MCS. They will contact your installer to come and put it right. And again, it's that reassurance of quality that is absolutely key. As a foundation, we sit above the company, and so the money and the profit that the company makes comes to the foundation, and we've given over 3 million away in grants. So we're actually helping not only the sector to break down the myths, to do a whole range of work that we do around that, but it's vital that we challenge some of these myths which are out there and provide hard scientific evidence to help policy and decision makers to make the right decisions. So we're a mark of quality. We have a fantastic standard scheme, and it provides that consumer confidence. So always look out for the MCS mark. We also have a fantastic data dashboard, and this is a shameless plug from our end, from the point of view that if you want to see how many heat pumps are being installed across the UK, you can go onto the website. If you want to see how many in Scotland, you can see how many are in Scotland or how many in Wales, and you can do a comparison. But you can look at the different technologies which are being put in. And Scotland has some of the highest deployments of renewables. And in fact, the Orkneys I believe, is one of the highest, and it's off gas grid, a remote community with many old buildings. And when people go, you can't put a heat pump in off gas grid. Of course you can. It's ideal for those solutions. And we heard others talking about listed buildings when Richard was talking. Well, the National Trust in England have now started putting in heat pumps to some of their grade 1 listed properties. So there is not a single building that you can't put a heat pump in. There's perhaps a different solution that you may need for it, or a different type of heat pump, but there's always a heat pump solution. And also just to say that if you are thinking about getting a heat pump, it was mentioned by Susan earlier, there is a website called Get a Heat Pump. It's basic, simple consumer advice, and it just answers the questions if you're just thinking about it. If you want to go on the journey, some of the experts on the panel today have got some brilliant information and great products, which could be really useful. And just to say that as a foundation, we take a much wider view. So it's not only about decarbonising homes, heat and energy. We need to think our homes are 17%, but heating as a whole in the UK is nearly 30% of CO2 emissions. And when you actually look at the energy that is providing that heat, that needs to be decarbonised as well. So we need to start moving away from fossil fuels. We've been dependent on gas and oil, and it's been cheap and we've not minded. But now we have a cost of living crisis. We really need to address it. We do research, we commission it to inform the policy debate, and to really push back on some of the solutions which perhaps other fossil fuel providers may think is a good solution, but clearly is not. And we need to challenge those misbeliefs, those misconcepts which are out there. And I think the MCS mark, as I said, is a quality mark. It underpins that renewable energy. And if you can see the MCS certified standard, and again, as part of Home Energy Scotland, if you get a grant, it's got to be MCS certified product that's being installed by an MCS certified installer. So you can go onto the site, you can find a local installer near you, which is the key thing. So our vision, just to finalise my comments, are we want to try and make every UK home carbon free, but also it's the right choice to do. It's going to be cheaper, more cost effective. It's going to provide long-term security. You know, if you combine the heat pump with solar panels, battery storage, that combination of technologies will reduce bills substantially for homes. And I won't go into our detailed research, but it's to say that this is not only a great way of helping reduce carbon emissions, it's a great way of helping people potentially reduce their bills in the long term as we go forward. Thank you.
Thanks very much, David. And
I'll stop sharing.
I may be slightly biased here, but a great presentation, of course, showing what the MCS Foundation and the MCS company are all about. Right, so we are almost on schedule, minute or two over, but that's okay. So time for the Q&A and to try and get everyone else involved. So as I said at the beginning, we've had a range of questions submitted both before the webinar when people were registering, and we've also had one during as well. We won't be able to get through them all, unfortunately. We had a lot of questions come in when people were registering. We are going to begin with questions that have been pre-submitted when attendees registered for the event, and hopefully we have time at the end for some that come through during the session. I can see, oh, now we've got 3, so 2 have just popped one in there as I was chatting. That's good. So yeah, a reminder, if you'd like to ask your questions, pop it in the Q&A function. Finally, if panelists could spend a maximum of 5 minutes on each question, that would be fantastic. So let's get into it. So the first question they're going to try and tackle is this, and there's a few separate bits to this, but I'm going to read it as it came in. So the question is, are there any types of property that heat pumps are not suitable for? The questioner says, we live in a rural area outside Lennoxtown and have an LPG tank. The government cannot introduce legislation forcing people to change unless they are willing to fund all or 80% of the cost. Pensioners, the vast majority, cannot afford heating, never mind the method when all else in the cost of living is featured. So if there's a myth about heat pumps, is there a myth that people can afford them? So Susan, if I come to you to start, there's a few separate points in there, so other panelists will come in as well. So there's a question about cost. So how can people afford a heat pump?
So I think it's really important to point out that no one is going to force anyone to have a heat pump or any kind of heating that they don't choose to have themselves. But the government are trying to encourage people to have low carbon heating systems. We're producing a lot of renewable energy in Scotland, which is reducing the price of electricity. So in the long term, hopefully, electricity is always going to be a cost-effective way of heating. But I think the important thing, it's absolutely correct. The government should be supporting this policy if that's what they want. And that's where the MCS Foundation and the website Get a Heat Pump come in. It's where Home Energy Scotland website comes in, and where the grants that the Scottish Government are offering through that of 7,500 as a grant, as I've already said, up to 9,000 if you live in a rural area. And there's also the option to take an interest-free loan of 7,500. But for people who want to get more support, they can, through the Home Energy Scotland website, they can get in touch with Warm Homes Scotland, and they have got an absolutely start-to-finish service where they come into your home and basically take you through the process and make sure that you've got all your options covered and you're insulating your home so that you're not spending more than you need to do to heat your home as well. But I think it's really important that you understand that the cost of heating your home will not necessarily come down, but it will with the heat pump. But it could be that, you know, your electricity plus your gas and all of these costs together, it's lower. You start when you have no cost for the gas coming in and things like that, you end up with lower costs. And if you have, as part of the putting in the heat pump, you, as David was saying, you put in some solar panels and some battery storage, you can absolutely minimize the costs that you're paying. So what you do effectively is you have a very efficient way of heating your home, and it's cost effective as well. But, you know, the overall aim of this, and I know we've heard some real expertise round about the technology of heat pumps, but the overall aim for me is that you have a warm home. And as gas boilers are being phased out, technology is changing. You have the information to make informed decisions about what you want to do next. And I think, yeah, pass back to Eric.
No, thanks, Susan. I think that's exactly it, isn't it? It's about the information, so people are confident to go forward, and correct as well to mention the £7,500 grant, and also the 7,500 in Scotland, 7,500 interest-free loan. How we can try and get take up higher for interest-free loans is a separate challenge for all of us to consider. I'm just going to open this up to the rest of the panel to come in on this. There was a few separate bits in that question. There was, you know, on types of properties heat pumps are not suitable for, but also about the cost and people can afford them. If anyone wants to come in on that one. Bean, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I thought it was worth just pointing out. I think, Susan, I think I'm right that your constituency includes Queen's Quay in Glasgow. Is that correct?
Which is a tower block that has a ground source heat pump. Is that correct?
So I just thought I was going to mention this because
not in my it's not in my constituency, but it's nearby.
Oh right, okay. I was looking at the map. I thought perhaps it was, but the point I want to make here is that it is not necessarily the case that every individual homeowner will be required to meet a significant capital cost. If, as Richard has talked about, you're in a position to have some shared ground loops, then some of the cost of that infrastructure is likely to be borne elsewhere. The reason I mentioned Queen's Quay in Glasgow is that there is a massive centralized plant heat pump, which will then push out district heating across the redevelopment of that whole area. So the vast capital cost is being held centrally, and people who are connected to that heat network will be paying for what we refer to as heat as a service. So you will effectively pay for the amount of heat that you use, and you'll be in complete control of how much you want to be able to heat your house. So I don't think that people should necessarily assume that the capital cost is going to be enormous for them. Depends on the type of heat pump that they're going to end up on. But the key here for me is that government and the finance sector will need to work together to make affordable capital available. And if we can do that, we can provide the technologies, government and finance can help with the affordability, then we are with a very, very good chance of delivering really super comfort levels, because the comfort levels, I think, will also improve as we decarbonize UK homes and businesses.
Thanks, Bean. Yes, I'll pass to Joanna if you be very, very brief so we can get on to the next question.
I promise I'll be very brief. And all I just
Thank
wanted
you.
to say was affordability is absolutely key. From a product point of view, the products are capable. They're capable of doing the same temperatures that your fossil fuel boilers will do today. It's about your home setup and your home choices. And that comes down to education and information. So from our advice, it would be talk to your installer about this capital upfront cost versus your running costs, and the choice absolutely would be the homeowners. It's your choice.
Thanks,
And Eric, can I just make one minor addition to that? So everybody, a common myth is that heat pumps are really expensive. It's just the one-off systems change that you have to make sometimes, and some of the adjustments to a home, and they will vary in cost. But actually, if you've got a heat pump and you're replacing a heat pump, it's not that much more than a gas boiler. So you need to consider that heat pumps actually aren't expensive. It's just the one-off systems change. Like when you put in a gas boiler and central heating for the first time, you'd need to put in radiators and pipes and things. It's that type of thing. So breaking that myth, don't think that heat pumps are expensive.
Thank you, David. So we will move on to the second question. This is another pre-submitted question from an attendee. So thank you for this. So the question is, are they cost effective? We've already touched a little bit on that. And what disruption do they cause when fitting them? So maybe it's worth focusing on the second half of that. So what disruption do they cause when fitting them? Richard, if I ask you to kick off on this one, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, of course. So I think to take both elements of it, as with all of this, it all depends. So some properties are going to be more complicated than others, some are going to be more expensive than others. You're already in a position where, for example, Octopus are offering to fit a heat pump for £500. There are properties all over the country where it is an extremely straightforward proposition, where the radiators are already the perfect size, they've already got the right room for the hot water tank, and they can do the whole thing for 500 quid. You're already in a position where heat pumps are about cost, in terms of running it, about the same cost to run a heat pump as a gas boiler today. And that's because whilst a heat pump is about 3 to 4 times more efficient than a gas boiler, so for every unit of heat that you put into your home, you'll use about 1/3 to 1/4 of a unit of electricity. A gas, you're using more like 1.2 units of gas for every unit of heat that you put into your home, because a gas boiler is 80 to 90% efficient. A heat pump is 300 to 400% efficient. The challenge we have in the UK is electricity is about 4 times the price of gas. So even though we're way more efficient with a heat pump, because of that gap between electricity and gas prices, you're getting about cost parity with a gas boiler. Now, it's something that the industry is talking to the government a lot about, and actually we're hopeful we will get some policy proposals put forward later this year, fingers crossed, where the government will take steps to reduce electricity prices. You've seen that happen all over Europe. So Netherlands, which is very comparable to the UK in the amount of gas boilers that are in people's homes, about 80% of homes in the Netherlands are heated with gas. They took steps. So electricity is now 2/3 the price of gas. So there, if you put a heat pump in, you are saving vast amounts of money on your heating bill. And that's the direction of travel that we need to be going on in the UK. To the second element of the question, in terms of this disruption, some properties will basically be ready to put a heat pump in. All will need some different form for hot water. So at the minute, your combi boiler is producing the hot water as you turn the tap on. A heat pump, because it is so much more efficient, and it's your gas boiler is probably 30 kilowatts. I don't want to get into technical terms, but your heat pump is probably 5. So it is not able to produce that hot water at exactly the time that you want it. So it produces it before. So you will need a hot water tank, or there are alternatives out there like a heat battery, as I mentioned earlier. So for really small properties, you can charge up effectively. It's basically like an old night storage heater, but it's storing a load of heat for when you need it for your hot water. So you will need extra equipment in your home, but the amount of disruption, it really depends on, as Joanna said earlier, on your individual choices. So heat pumps can already produce heat at 75 degrees. So if your view was, I don't want to, or I can't afford to change any of the radiators in my home, you could have a heat pump set up to run at the same temperature as your boiler. So there are different levels of disruption. At the other end of the scale, you can say, I want everything absolutely perfect. I want it to run at 30 degrees, and therefore I'm going to put underfloor heating in. And that obviously will be a high level of disruption, but there is a huge scale in the level of disruption and the costs that different homes might need to have or even want to have to put their heat pump in.
Thanks very much, Richard. That's a really, really good answer. I'm going to move straight on to another question that we had come in before the webinar, which is, are heat pumps coastal protected, for example, from the sea and salt air? So I'm going to pass that to Joanna, if that's okay, to kick us off on that one.
Of course. So the short answer is absolutely, yes, it is. I can only talk about our heat pumps, but yes, we treat the external panels and enhance the corrosion potential of the key components for coastal protection. This doesn't come as standard, however, it is available in all models and all sizes, so it's available for any models that we do. Our recommended guidance is for all units, all properties within 300 meters of the sea should use coastal models, and anything up to 1 kilometer away should be considered, and that will depend on if there are any obstructions and the way in which the unit is facing. There's a handy guide on our website to help. So yes, heat pumps with coastal protections are available.
Brilliant, great. I'm going to move straight on to question number 4 in the interest of time. So this is a little bit of a bit of a bigger one, and something that we haven't touched on yet. So do we have the required amounts of installers who are sufficiently qualified with technical knowledge about heat pumps, and how can we find ones that we can trust? So Bean, if I ask you to kick us off on this one, that'd be fantastic.
Sure. Yeah, look, again, if I can be shameless, we actually published one of our podcast episodes this morning, and it was on installers and how to find them. The answer is yes, we probably do have enough installers right now. And I think actually the installer base we've got at the moment could probably absorb quite a bit of growth. The problem is that it's not always in the right place. So matching up spare capacity with installers and demand is sometimes a problem. So the key here is that consumers do need to do a little bit of homework. The transition, as David rightly said, the cost of the transition is relatively high. Once you've done the transition, you're just replacing a unit that, in 15 years' time, then that's much more like replacing a boiler. But you are spending quite a bit of money. And so it is important for homeowners to do their research. The certification bodies have all their listings, but actually you should really take advantage of some of the other opportunities. We actually publish a procurement advice document on the Heat Pump Federation website. And again, I'll make sure that Susan has the link for her information paper. And there is no substitute for going and looking at work that installers have done. So ask your friends who have already had it done, who's doing good work. I don't know whether, does Nesta, do they visit a heat pump? Does that extend to Scotland? I'm not sure whether it does, but Nesta, certainly in England, I don't know whether this applies in Scotland, they have a visit a heat pump opportunity where you can put your postcode in, and there are homeowners who are prepared to take in guests to have a look and see, touch, listen to the heat pumps in operation. But you should be taking up references, go and visit work that's been done, talk to homeowners, do the research, because the quality of the installer is critical. Obviously, they've got to be certified, but do the research. No substitute for doing the research in this instance. And we are growing the installer base at quite a considerable rate. I am confident that we will be growing that installer base at a rate that will meet the demand growth, but doesn't get you away from the fact that you've got to do the research.
Thanks, Bean. If no one else wants to come in on that one.
So can I just
Yes,
make
of
one
course.
comment on that?
Of course.
I think that it's absolutely true that you need to do that for almost anything that you're doing, you know, whether you're building a conservatory or, putting in a new gas boiler, a new system, whatever. It's always really important that you get a good installer.
And just to add to that as well is that along Bean's points, which I totally agree with, you know, about the capacity we've got to absorb it, going forward, as more and more heat pumps get deployed, as people make a choice that it's the cheapest and best solution for them going forward, that we need to bring young people along board. So, I mean, we need to get people doing apprenticeships, and MCS and the MCS Foundation have started a low carbon heating apprenticeship. So again, there could be young people out there who are thinking, well, what's a really good career? And this is a career for the future, is how to install heat pumps, of moving forward and having that longevity. So it's a case of we need to be working at schools, through colleges, making sure that university isn't the only pathway, that in fact, dare I say, earning and learning through apprenticeship schemes is another great way of actually getting into the sector. But also we're seeing companies like OVO, who are bringing in 5,000 heat pump installers. British Gas, they're retraining their staff, and they're estimating to be getting 7,000. And again, you've got Octopus, who again are training up 5,000. So we're seeing a large number of people with cross-training and skills who will be coming into the sector to help meet this growth. But as being said, at the moment, you need to look around, you need to find the installer. And I think looking at some of their work is a brilliant recommendation.
Thank you, David. In the interest of time, because I do want to get to at least one or two from the Q&A in the chats that's in the Zoom, I'm going to move on to a question that we've had come in there during the webinar, which is, what percentage of the total cost is covered by the grant? I assume they're referring to the 7,500 in Scotland, and is there any grants available for pensioners? I will, whoever, if you could pop your hand up if anyone wants to come in from the panel on that one. Yes, David, go ahead.
I'll dive in with that one straight away. So, I mean, sort of, as Susan touched on earlier about the grants, if you live in a rural area in Scotland, there's up to £9,000. That is something that you don't need to pay back. That's a grant that you apply for. And again, for insulation measures in your property, so if you need to replace single glazing windows with double glazed, or you need to do insulation measures, again, if you're in a rural area, you can borrow up to 9,000, or you get a grant rather for £9,000. So the grants which are available at the moment within Scotland are £18,000 if you live in a rural area. They're £15,000 if you don't. Now, on top of that, there are other benefits to the schemes which are running in Scotland compared to England and Wales. So under the Home Energy Scotland grant, there's also a loan scheme. So for instance, if you don't have the money up front, and you don't have it available, what you can do is you can borrow £7,500 on a heat pump. So you get a grant for 7,500, and you could borrow up to 7,500 as well to cover the full installation of it and pay it back over a period of time through the Home Energy Scotland grant and loan scheme. So, I mean, it is very versatile, and also it can help with district heating, solar thermal, through a whole range of different bits and pieces. But also you can get loans and grants for solid wall insulation, flat roof, loft and cavity, underfloor, insulated doors. So again, you could get a loan to replace your doors up to £4,500 from the Scottish government. And again, warm air units, and as I mentioned, double glazing. So there's a raft of things which are available. And again, if you go to the Home Energy Scotland website, they've got a couple of really great tables that just show you what is grant, so you get for up to free, and then if you want to borrow additional money, you borrow that at 0% interest, so you know the amount of money isn't going to be going up, and it's a very cost-effective way of helping actually renovate and do parts to your home to make it more cost-effective and to bring your bills down permanently.
Thanks, David. That's really, really helpful, and also thanks to the to the panel as well, who some of whom are typing answers in the Q&A, which is really helpful because we can't get through them all. So thank you for that.
Can I just add one thing to that
Yes,
particular
yes.
question? That many local authorities, and I don't know what the situation is in this particular area of Scotland, offer the ability to borrow thermal imaging cameras, and taking thermal images of your home is a very, very good way of prioritizing where you put your investment. So if you can identify where the problems are in terms of heat loss, and that could be draft, it could be heat loss through doors and walls and windows, but it could also be draft. And actually solving draft problems can be incredibly cost effective. It can be very cheap to do, but you can get a great outcome. So thermal imaging is a very good way of identifying where you should prioritize your investments in improving the home, and then using the loans and the various grants to be able to do that work. But it does allow you to pick the places where you're going to make the most difference in the shortest possible time.
Thanks, Bean. I'm going to try to squeeze in one more before I hand over to Susan. So the question's coming on: what role do heat networks have in energy decarbonisation alongside heat pumps? So does anyone feel brave enough to explain, for those who might not know, heat networks in about 60 seconds?
Well, yeah, look, very quickly, Richard has already talked about networked ground source heat pumps. So that's a version of networks. I alluded to the scheme on the Clyde, which is a district heating scheme. So it's big centralized plant that's pushing out water. Government's current thinking is that ultimately 20% of UK's homes could well end up on a network of some sort or other. I think ultimately we may find that that is an underestimate.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, well, it's 2 minutes to 6. So just before we head off, I wanted to pass over to Susan for some closing remarks. And before I do, I'd just like to thank everyone on the panel for joining today, and to thank everyone that's attended. I hope you found it informative, and we will be in touch after the webinar. I really do apologize if we haven't been able to get to your question. We will do what we can to make sure we do that after the event. So over to you, Susan.
So thank you very much. I'd just like to add my thanks to everybody that's come, and to Eric, and also to say thank you to Eric for arranging to answer the questions that we haven't managed to answer on the webinar. So you will get an answer. But if you would also like to email me, I will share the information that we've got, the web addresses, and any information that the panelists give to us, so that you've got it in writing. But I think that it's clear that there's a huge amount of information out there.
Well, we've not been hit with a technical glitch right at the very, very last second. Perhaps we'll give Susan a moment to see if she rejoins. But if not, then I'm sure she would say that we'll be, yes.
Richard, and to David for helping me as your MP to give you this webinar and to give you this information. But do visit their website to learn more about them, and also the other websites that can give you so much information. And just I would end on a final point, that there is a telephone number to get in touch with Home Energy Scotland, and I know some of you will prefer to be able to speak to somebody. So we will have that in our leaflet about the sources of information. But thank you all again, presenters and people attending. I hope you found it useful.
Thanks very much, Susan, and thank you,
Thank you.
everybody. Have a fantastic
Thank you.
evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Everyone,
Bye-bye.
bye-bye.